The courtroom air was already thick with an unspoken tension, a palpable sense of unease that settled deep in the bones of everyone present. It wasn't the usual Monday morning drama Judge Judy Scheinlin was accustomed to. No, this case felt different, heavier, more volatile. Outside the hallowed halls of justice, the city still simmered, a barely contained inferno threatening to reignite at the slightest spark. And inside, a single traffic stop, a seemingly mundane encounter, was about to be dissected, revealing the dark, twisted threads that had set an entire metropolis ablaze. Nobody truly understood the full gravity of the situation, not yet. Not even Judge Judy, a woman who prided herself on seeing through the murk of human deception. She'd read the initial police reports, seen the surface-level details. A routine pullover, a minor infraction, a swift arrest. End of story, right? But the stack of filings on her bench, the anxious faces of the attorneys, and the sheer number of armed bailiffs in the room told a far more complex, more dangerous tale. This wasn't just about a broken taillight or a disputed parking ticket. This was about a fracture in the very fabric of a community, and its epicenter was here, in her courtroom. The plaintiff, Jamal Davis, a young black man with tired eyes and a tremor in his voice, sat rigidly beside his attorney. Across the aisle, Officer Mark Jensen, a seasoned white officer with a stern, unyielding gaze, maintained a posture of professional composure. He looked like a man who had done his job, followed protocol, and now faced an inexplicable storm of public outrage. This was the narrative presented to the world, a narrative that painted Davis as a defiant agitator and Jensen as a victim of misguided anger. But Judge Judy knew better than to trust the first draft of history. Her court was where the real story, the inconvenient truths, were brutally unmasked. The first few minutes of the hearing were a blur of procedural formalities, a legal dance that did little to calm the churning anxiety in the room. But then, Judge Judy's voice cut through the preamble, sharp and decisive, signaling the true beginning of the psychological battle. "Mr. Davis, tell me precisely what happened the moment Officer Jensen pulled you over," she commanded, her eyes, piercing and relentless, fixed solely on the young man. The entire courtroom held its breath. This wasn't just a question. It was the opening of a wound, a direct invitation into the incident that had, just days prior, turned this city upside down. Jamal shifted, his fingers nervously tracing the polished wood of the table. He swallowed hard, his gaze briefly flicking to Officer Jensen before returning to Judge Judy. "It was a Tuesday evening, Your Honor. Around 9 p.m. I was heading home from my sister's, had just picked up some groceries." His voice was raspy, edged with a fear that transcended the formality of the court. "I noticed the flashing lights behind me, pulled over immediately, just like you're supposed to." Judge Judy leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "And what happened next, Mr. Davis? Did you comply with the officer's instructions?" "Yes, Your Honor. Absolutely. I put my hands on the wheel, 10 and 2. Waited for him to approach," Jamal insisted, his voice gaining a fragile conviction. "He came to the window, shining his flashlight directly in my face. Said I had a broken taillight, which I later found out wasn't true, by the way." A ripple of murmuring swept through the gallery, quickly silenced by a stern look from Judge Judy. This wasn't just a minor detail, it was the first crack in the officer's version of events. If the initial reason for the stop was fabricated, what else was? "So, you disputed the taillight claim?" Judge Judy pressed, her tone deliberately neutral, yet charged with an underlying skepticism. "No, not at first. I just said, 'Okay, officer, I understand.' I was trying to be polite, trying to de-escalate," Jamal explained, his eyes pleading for understanding. "But then he asked for my license and registration, and when I reached into my glove compartment for my registration, that's when everything changed." His voice faltered, catching in his throat. A heavy silence descended, a premonition of the terror that was about to unfold. But that wasn't even the worst part. What Jamal described next wasn't just a miscommunication, it was a terrifying descent into chaos. He recounted how Officer Jensen, seeing him reach, shouted, "Hands! Keep your hands where I can see them." His tone, Jamal claimed, had instantly become aggressive, accusatory. I tried to explain I was just getting my papers, but he wouldn't let me. He was yelling, telling me to get out of the car. The emotional toll of reliving the moment was clear on Jamal's face, a silent testament to the trauma. The courtroom hung on his every word, each syllable painting a more vivid, more disturbing picture. Judge Judy's gaze hardened, shifting from Jamal to Officer Jensen, who remained impassive. "Officer Jensen, did you perceive Mr. Davis's actions as a threat?" she asked, her voice cutting directly to the heart of the matter. The question hung in the air, a pivotal moment that could define the entire narrative. The officer's attorney, a stern woman in a sharply tailored suit, immediately rose. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation." "Overruled," Judge Judy snapped, her eyes never leaving Jensen. "The officer can state his perception. This isn't a game. Answer the question, officer." Her authority was absolute, silencing the objection and sending a clear message. Obfuscation would not be tolerated here. Officer Jensen, now under the direct, unblinking scrutiny of Judge Judy, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, when Mr. Davis moved his hands out of sight, reaching into the glove compartment, it created an immediate safety concern. In that moment, given the low light and the unknown contents of the vehicle, I perceived it as a potential threat. My training dictates a heightened level of caution in such situations." His voice was calm, professional, a stark contrast to Jamal's emotional account. This was the clash: perception versus reality, protocol versus human experience. And that's when the case suddenly took a completely different direction. Jamal's attorney, Ms. Chun, a sharp, composed woman, then introduced the first piece of physical evidence, a low-resolution, shaky cell phone video. "Your Honor, we have a short clip recorded by a bystander that captures the critical moments immediately after Mr. Davis exited the vehicle." The mention of video footage sent a ripple of fresh tension through the room. Video, in these cases, was often the ultimate arbiter, the cold, impartial witness. As the video played on the courtroom monitor, a gasp escaped a few spectators. The audio was muffled, but the visual was undeniable. It showed Jamal Davis, hands raised, stepping out of his car. Officer Jensen was clearly seen, shouting commands, his hand already on his service weapon. The footage was brief, perhaps 15 seconds, but it captured the raw, escalating confrontation. Jamal was attempting to speak, but the officer's voice, though distorted, dominated the soundscape. Then, suddenly, the camera shook violently, and the frame became obscured, ending abruptly. "The video, Your Honor, clearly shows Mr. Davis complying with the order to exit the vehicle, hands visible," Ms. Chin argued, her voice firm. "It also shows Officer Jensen's immediate aggressive posture, weapon drawn, despite Mr. Davis's clear attempts at de-escalation. The sudden termination of the video, we contend, is due to the witness being instructed to cease recording or being otherwise intimidated." This was a direct challenge to Jensen's claim of perceiving a threat after Jamal exited the car, and it introduced a layer of potential intimidation, adding fuel to the already raging fire. Judge Judy replayed the video segment twice, her eyes scrutinizing every frame, every nuance of body language. Her face was a mask of intense concentration. She then turned back to Officer Jensen. "Officer, at what point in that video did Mr. Davis pose an immediate threat that necessitated a drawn weapon?" Her question was like a laser, cutting through the officer's carefully constructed defense. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum in which every single person in that courtroom held their breath. Jensen hesitated, his professional demeanor momentarily faltering. "Your Honor, my weapon was drawn as a precautionary measure, standard procedure, when dealing with a non-compliant suspect who has previously made motions that could be interpreted as reaching for a weapon." His response was textbook, but it didn't quite fit the visual evidence. The video showed Jamal compliant after exiting the car, hands clearly visible. The discrepancy was glaring. The jury noticed one small detail that changed everything. Though Judge Judy presides over a bench trial, the invisible jury of public opinion and media present in the gallery was certainly noticing the holes in the officer's testimony. Judge Judy, with her unparalleled ability to zero in on inconsistencies, wasn't satisfied. Precautionary measure, officer? After he's out of the vehicle, hands up? Are you suggesting Mr. Davis was a threat even when fully exposed, fully visible, complying with your command to exit? Her voice was colder now, sharper, the steel beneath the velvet of her judicial robes becoming undeniably apparent. The officer shifted uncomfortably, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Your Honor, the initial perception of threat from his movement in the vehicle dictated the heightened response. That posture, once adopted, remains until the threat is definitively neutralized. It was a desperate attempt to stick to procedure, to justify the escalation, but it sounded hollow, almost robotic, in the face of Jamal's raw, human account. This was the psychological conflict, the rigidity of protocol clashing with the fluidity of human interaction, especially across a racial divide. Ms. Chun then moved to her next point, a calculated strike that landed with devastating precision. Your Honor, Mr. Davis's cell phone was reportedly damaged during his arrest. We have photos here, along with the repair estimate. Mr. Davis contends his phone was deliberately smashed by Officer Jensen when he attempted to film the arrest on his own device. The introduction of the phone damage wasn't just about a claim for property, it was an implication of evidence destruction, an act that spoke volumes about potential misconduct. Jamal recounted, his voice trembling again, how as he was being handcuffed, he tried to activate his phone's camera. I just wanted proof, Your Honor. I felt like things were getting out of control, and I knew I needed to document it. He then described a sudden, violent grab for his phone, followed by the sickening crunch of plastic and glass. He twisted my arm, slammed my phone against the patrol car, then threw it on the ground and kicked it. His eyes welled up, not just from the memory of the phone, but the sheer powerlessness he felt. Officer Jensen, however, had a different story. His attorney presented a written statement from the officer. Officer Jensen states, Your Honor, that Mr. Davis became agitated during the handcuffing procedure. He was reaching for something in his pocket, despite repeated warnings. In the struggle, Mr. Davis's phone accidentally fell and was damaged. Officer Jensen denies any deliberate act of destruction. This was a direct, head-on contradiction, turning the blame back on Jamal, portraying him as uncooperative and the architect of his own misfortune. Judge Judy leaned back, her eyes narrowed. She had seen countless variations of this story. The accidental damage to a piece of evidence, the agitated suspect, the struggle. She knew these narratives intimately. Officer Jensen, she began, her voice slow and deliberate, is it your testimony that Mr. Davis was still resisting arrest while being handcuffed, and that his phone fell out during this supposed struggle? Her phrasing was meticulous, designed to corner him, to expose any chinks in his armor. Yes, Your Honor. He was uncooperative. He was reaching. The phone was damaged in the ensuing struggle to secure him, Jensen repeated, his voice maintaining its flat, almost rehearsed tone. He stuck to his story with a conviction that, to a less experienced observer, might have seemed utterly convincing. But Judge Judy was no ordinary observer. She saw the minute tells, the subtle hesitations, the almost imperceptible shifts in his gaze. What happened next shocked even the prosecutors. Ms. Chun, sensing the opportune moment, produced a second video, this one from a commercial security camera across the street, capturing a wider, albeit more distant, view of the stop. The footage was grainy, no audio, but it showed the patrol car, Jamal's vehicle, and the figures of Jamal and Officer Jensen. It also captured the moments of the arrest. Critically, it showed Jamal being handcuffed, his hands clearly behind his back, seemingly no longer struggling. Then, a distinct movement from Officer Jensen, a swift, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist, and a small, dark object, presumably the phone, flying from his hand, hitting the pavement. It wasn't a fall. It was a throw. The courtroom exploded in hushed gasps and frantic whispers. Officer Jensen's face, which had been so stoic, drained of color. His attorney looked visibly stunned, her carefully constructed defense crumbling before her eyes. Judge Judy watched the replay, her expression darkening with each pass. The contradiction was absolute. The second video, though distant, irrevocably undermined the officer's claim of an accidental fall during a struggle. It was a deliberate act. Officer Jensen. Judge Judy's voice was now a low, dangerous rumble. Do you still maintain that Mr. Davis's phone was damaged during a struggle where it accidentally fell? Her eyes bored into him, a silent, psychological interrogation that stripped away his professional facade, exposing the man beneath. The pressure in the courtroom was suffocating. Every spectator felt the weight of that question, the sudden, devastating shift in the narrative. Jensen was trapped. He visibly flinched, his composure cracking. He looked at his attorney, then back at Judge Judy, his gaze finally dropping to the floor. "Your Honor," he began, his voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to his earlier confident assertions. He couldn't lie, not with the irrefutable evidence playing directly behind him. The entire courtroom fell into a profound, chilling silence, awaiting his confession or his desperate attempt at evasion. This was the moment of reckoning, the pivotal point where the carefully crafted facade of order and protocol collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. And that's when the truth began to unravel, not just about the phone, but about everything. Officer Jensen finally, reluctantly admitted, the phone was a distraction. He was attempting to record. I removed it. His words were strained, heavy with an admission he clearly didn't want to make. He avoided the word through, avoided smashed, but the implication was clear. It was a deliberate act, not an accident. This small admission, forced by irrefutable video evidence, was a colossal breach in his credibility. If he lied about the phone, what else was a lie? Judge Judy, however, wasn't done. She pushed further. Removed it, officer? The video shows it being forcefully discarded. Is that your standard procedure for removing a distraction? Her sarcasm was thinly veiled, her disdain evident. The psychological pressure she exerted was immense, designed to break down every layer of his story. The courtroom was mesmerized, watching the slow, agonizing dissection of a police officer's testimony. The officer's attorney, seeing her client crumble, tried to intervene. Your Honor, my client was acting under immense pressure. The situation was escalating. The plaintiff was non-compliant. He was reaching for a phone, counselor, not a weapon. Judge Judy interrupted, her voice cutting through the excuse like a hot knife through butter. And your client lied about how it was damaged. That's not pressure. That's deception. And it makes me wonder what else you're hiding. Her accusation hung in the air, a devastating blow not just to Jensen, but to the credibility of the entire defense. The fallout from this single revelation was immediate and far-reaching. The media, present in the form of a few sketch artists and reporters, furiously scribbled notes. Public outrage, which had initially been fueled by anecdotal accounts and Jamal's emotional pleas, now had concrete, undeniable video evidence to latch onto. This wasn't just a disputed traffic stop. It was an abuse of power caught on camera, followed by an attempted cover-up. And Judge Judy was meticulously peeling back the layers. Ms. Chun, seeing the advantage, pressed the officer on other details of the arrest. Officer Jensen, when you issued the initial command to exit the vehicle, did you inform Mr. Davis why he was being pulled over, beyond the alleged taillight issue? Jensen paused. He was informed of the taillight. And then, due to his noncompliance, the situation escalated. He was trying to pivot back to Jamal's supposed noncompliance, but the foundation of his argument was cracking. Noncompliance with what, officer? Judge Judy interjected, her voice sharp. Reaching for his registration? Attempting to record an interaction that was rapidly turning hostile? Explain to me, precisely, what noncompliance justified drawing a weapon and then later, destroying property. She was relentlessly pursuing the truth, refusing to allow any legal jargon or procedural excuses to obscure the facts. The intense focus of Judge Judy was unnerving even for veteran lawyers, let alone a defendant under her direct scrutiny. The narrative expanded beyond the immediate incident. Ms. Chun began to paint a pattern, referencing internal police reports, which, through legal discovery, had become part of the evidence. Your Honor, we have evidence of multiple civilian complaints against Officer Jensen regarding aggressive behavior and racial profiling, some of which resulted in disciplinary action.
This was a bombshell.
It transformed the incident from an isolated event into a potential systemic issue, a reflection of a deeper problem within the police force and the community. The courtroom buzzed with renewed vigor. Officer Jensen's attorney immediately objected, citing character assassination and prior bad acts. Overruled, Judge Judy stated unwavering, "These complaints are relevant to the officer's state of mind, his perception of threat, and the plaintiff's claim of racial profiling.
They speak to a pattern."
Mr. Davis isn't just claiming an isolated incident. He's claiming he was targeted. The court will hear it. Her decision was a clear signal. The scope of this case was widening, delving into the fraught history between law enforcement and the community it served. The testimony shifted to the pattern of complaints. Each one, read aloud by Ms. Chen, was a microstory of alleged aggression, disrespect, and perceived racial bias. The details were uncomfortable, raw, and chillingly consistent. Officer Jensen sat rigidly, his face now a mask of barely suppressed fury and humiliation. The psychological pressure was immense, a public indictment of his entire career. But the real psychological warfare was yet to come. Ms. Chun then brought forth a new witness, a former colleague of Officer Jensen, Officer Ramirez, who had since left the force. Ramirez, nervous but resolute, testified that Jensen had a known reputation for being hot-headed and for having a short fuse with certain demographics, particularly young black men. He always said they were looking for trouble, even when they weren't. It was always us versus them with him, Ramirez revealed, his voice steady despite the obvious discomfort of testifying against a former peer. This testimony wasn't just character evidence, it was an insider's view, corroborating Jamal's claims of racial profiling. It painted a picture of a man whose personal biases might have dangerously influenced his professional judgment. Officer Jensen's attorney furiously cross-examined Ramirez, attempting to discredit him, suggesting he had a vendetta or was disgruntled. But Ramirez held his ground, his sincerity unwavering. "I just couldn't stand by and let another injustice happen," he said, his gaze meeting Jamal's briefly, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. Judge Judy listened intently, observing Jensen's reactions. He squirmed, clenched his jaw, his eyes darting between Ramirez and the floor. His composure was all but shattered. The narrative was no longer just about a single traffic stop. It was about the culture, the biases, and the human element behind the badge, a deep dive into the psychological underpinnings of power and prejudice. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute, each revelation. The public, through media coverage, was now fully invested. News channels ran constant updates, analyzing every piece of testimony, every shred of evidence. Social media was ablaze, dividing the city into factions. Those who supported Jamal, demanding justice and police reform, and those who defended Officer Jensen, decrying what they saw as an attack on law enforcement. The very public nature of this trial, broadcast through the lens of Judge Judy's court, became a proxy battle for the soul of the city. Ms. Chin then shifted her focus to the physical injuries Jamal sustained during the arrest. "Your Honor, we have medical records documenting contusions, abrasions, and a sprained wrist, which Mr. Davis suffered during what he describes as an unnecessarily forceful arrest." She presented photos of Jamal's injuries, stark images of raw skin and bruising. These weren't severe, life-threatening injuries, but they were clear evidence of physical force that Jamal claimed was excessive and unwarranted. Jamal recounted how he was slammed against his car, his arm twisted painfully behind his back, the handcuffs cinched too tightly. It felt like he was trying to break my arm, Your Honor. And he kept saying, "Stop resisting," but I wasn't resisting. I was just trying to breathe. His voice was filled with a mix of anger and despair, painting a picture of deliberate infliction of pain. Officer Jensen, now on the defensive, maintained that Jamal had actively resisted arrest. He was pulling away, trying to free his hands. Force was necessary to gain compliance and ensure officer safety. He stuck to the narrative of resistance, but the earlier video of the phone incident and Ramirez's testimony had severely damaged his credibility. His claims now sounded like desperate attempts to justify his actions, rather than an honest recounting. Judge Judy, however, was not one to be swayed by emotion alone. She looked at the medical reports, the photos. "Officer Jensen, describe for me, precisely, the movements Mr. Davis made that necessitated slamming him against the vehicle and applying such force to his wrist that he sustained a sprain." Her voice was devoid of emotion, a sharp instrument cutting through the noise, demanding concrete details, not vague justifications. She was dismantling his story brick by brick, exposing every logical fallacy, every inconsistency. Jensen's response was hesitant, less confident than before. He described a vague struggle, a slight pull, a moment of perceived defiance. But the specific details, the precise movements she demanded, were lacking. His narrative felt thin, manufactured, unable to withstand the relentless scrutiny. The psychological pressure mounted, his carefully constructed wall of defense slowly crumbling under the weight of his own inconsistencies. This was the point where the emotional landscape of the courtroom began to shift dramatically. Ms. Chin brought in Jamal's mother, a soft-spoken woman whose testimony was brief but devastating. She spoke of Jamal's changed demeanor after the incident, the nightmares, the anxiety, the fear of police, the way he now avoided driving at night. Her voice, though quiet, resonated with a deep, maternal pain, adding a profound emotional layer to the cold legal facts. She wasn't just suing for damages, she was seeking recognition of her son's violated dignity, a restoration of his shattered sense of safety. The officer's attorney, attempting to counter the emotional impact, cross-examined the mother, suggesting that Jamal's trauma was exaggerated or manufactured for the court. "Mrs. Davis, isn't it true that your son has had minor run-ins with the law before? Perhaps his anxiety is a reflection of his own past choices." The attempt was a low blow, designed to undermine Jamal's character and paint him as a habitual troublemaker, making his current distress seem less legitimate. Judge Judy glared at the attorney. "Counselor, we are here to discuss this incident. Mr. Davis's past, if it exists, has absolutely no bearing on whether he was subjected to excessive force and false arrest on this particular night. Confine yourself to the facts of this case." Her rebuke was swift and sharp, a protective shield around the vulnerable witness, and a clear sign that attempts at character assassination would not be tolerated. The judge was not just a legal arbiter, she was a moral compass, guiding the courtroom through a morally ambiguous landscape. The narrative then turned to the ripple effect. The city exploded, part of the original title. Ms. Chun argued that the video of Jamal's arrest, combined with his public testimony about the broken phone and excessive force, had gone viral, igniting a powder keg of pre-existing tensions in the city. She presented news clippings, social media analytics, and reports from local advocacy groups, demonstrating the immediate and overwhelming public reaction. The traffic stop wasn't just a personal incident. It was a flashpoint, a symbol of long-standing grievances. "Your Honor, this wasn't just a random act of civil unrest," Ms. Chin explained, her voice rising with conviction. "This was a direct consequence, a societal tremor caused by the seismic shockwave of Officer Jensen's actions. The community saw Jamal Davis and they saw themselves. They saw the injustice, the disregard for dignity, the abuse of power. And they reacted. The damage to businesses, the protests, the fear, all of it flows from that initial, unjust interaction." The officer's attorney, clearly on the back foot, countered that the officer could not be held responsible for the actions of rioters. "My client's actions, even if disputed, Do not absolve others of their criminal behavior. To link a routine traffic stop to citywide unrest is a vast, illogical overreach, Your Honor. This was the core legal debate: causality. Could one officer's actions be directly blamed for the chaos that followed? Judge Judy, however, had a different perspective. No one is suggesting Officer Jensen is personally responsible for every shattered window, Counselor. But the question before me is whether his conduct on that night was a direct, proximate cause of Mr. Davis's damages. And furthermore, whether his conduct as a representative of law enforcement created the catalyst for the public's reaction. There's a difference between legal responsibility for a riot and being the spark that ignites a justifiable outrage. Her nuanced distinction was crucial, clarifying the scope of her ruling while still acknowledging the immense societal impact of the incident. The suspense in the courtroom became almost unbearable as the final arguments were presented. Both attorneys summarized their cases, re-emphasizing their key points. Ms. Chen focused on the officer's deceptive testimony regarding the phone, the corroborating video evidence, the pattern of complaints, and the emotional and physical toll on Jamal. She urged Judge Judy to recognize the profound injustice and the undeniable link between the officer's actions and the subsequent community explosion. The officer's attorney, desperately trying to salvage some credibility, highlighted the dangers officers face, the need for split-second decisions, and the professional training Jensen had received. She argued that Jamal's perceived noncompliance, however minor, justified the initial escalation, and that holding the officer responsible for the city's unrest was an unfair and legally unsustainable burden. She portrayed Officer Jensen as a dedicated public servant caught in an unfair, politically charged witch hunt. Judge Judy listened, her face giving away nothing. Her eyes scanned both parties, assessing their sincerity, their motives, the true weight of their arguments. She knew the eyes of the city, indeed, the nation, were upon her. This verdict wouldn't just decide a civil claim, it would send a powerful message about accountability, justice, and the delicate balance between authority and civil liberties. She then called Officer Jensen back to the stand for one final series of questions, a direct, unfiltered interrogation that would delve into his psychological state, stripping away all pretense. Officer Jensen, she began, her voice calm but penetrating. Look at Mr. Davis. Look him in the eyes. Jensen reluctantly turned, his gaze meeting Jamal's for the first time since the initial exchanges. The eye contact was brief, uncomfortable, charged with a history of power and vulnerability. Officer, knowing what you know now, seeing the impact this incident had on Mr. Davis and on the city, would you have acted differently that night? Judge Judy's question was not just legal, it was profoundly moral, a direct challenge to his conscience. The courtroom was utterly silent, every soul hanging on his answer. It was a moment of intense psychological pressure, a final test of his humanity. Jensen hesitated, a long, agonizing pause that felt like an eternity. He shifted, swallowed, his earlier stoicism completely gone, replaced by a raw, uncomfortable vulnerability. He looked at the floor, then briefly at Jamal, then back at Judge Judy. Your Honor, he finally whispered, his voice hoarse, devoid of its previous confidence. In retrospect, under different circumstances, perhaps. Perhaps there were other ways. It was not an admission of guilt, not a full confession, but it was an acknowledgement. An acknowledgement that the absolute certainty he had clung to, the rigid adherence to protocol, might have been flawed, might have been disastrous. This was the emotional climax, the raw truth laid bare. The slight crack in his armor was enough. It spoke volumes about the fear, the guilt, the denial that had been simmering beneath his professional exterior. It acknowledged the human cost, the profound impact of that one single stop. Judge Judy watched him, her gaze unwavering, her expression still unreadable, but a flicker of something, perhaps disappointment, perhaps a grim understanding, crossed her features. She then addressed Jamal. Mr. Davis, after everything you've heard, everything you've endured, what do you truly hope to achieve here today? Her question was an invitation for him to express the deeper, non-monetary desire for justice. Jamal's eyes, still tired but now imbued with a fragile dignity, met hers. "Your Honor," he began, his voice firmer than it had been all day, "I just want the truth to be told. I want people to know what happened that night. And I want officers to be held accountable for their actions, so this doesn't happen to anyone else. So another city doesn't explode." His words resonated with a powerful, universal plea for justice, for recognition, for change. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for a collective trauma. Judge Judy nodded slowly, absorbing his words, the weight of their meaning settling heavily in the silence. She looked around the courtroom, at the hushed faces, the anxious observers, the attorneys who had fought their battles. She saw the indelible mark this case had left on everyone, including herself. This wasn't just a dispute, it was a mirror reflecting the deepest divisions and wounds of society. "The court has heard the testimony, reviewed the evidence, and considered the arguments," she announced, her voice resonating with authority that seemed to fill every corner of the room. "This is not merely a case about a traffic stop or property damage. This is a case about perception, about power, about the profound consequences of a momentary interaction between authority and a citizen. It is a case that has exposed the fragility of trust and the devastating impact of bias and unchecked authority." The entire courtroom leaned forward, bracing for her decision. The air was electric, charged with anticipation. This verdict would not just determine a monetary award, it would be a statement, a ripple effect that would either soothe or further ignite the already volatile city. Every single person present knew that the next words from Judge Judy's lips would be etched into the collective memory, shaping the narrative and potentially altering the future. They couldn't leave, not now. The truth, raw and unforgiving, was about to be laid bare, and its implications would reverberate far beyond the confines of this courtroom, echoing through the very streets that had, just days ago, exploded in fury. The emotional addiction was complete, the suspense unbearable. The final judgment was upon them, poised to redefine the very meaning of justice in a world desperate for answers.